Alright, so back to another Under the Shell episode, and I've got a bit of a different one here for you. So this is a new member's car. It was actually owned originally by another member who we made a video for way back. If you look back on our video list, you'll see that we built a Shibata GRK for Rob. Rob got into the hobby and then kind of fell out of the hobby and actually decided he was going to sell up. So one of our members, Kyle, who's just been getting into this, he's bought this from Rob, which was actually an absolute bargain of a purchase. If you're just getting into the hobby, something like this is a really, really good purchase. He got all of this for 300 quid, which is a fantastic sort of starter setup, which included 2 batteries, a charger, fireproof bag, an MX6, and the complete car, which is a complete ready to race a car essentially. So when you compare that online to something like an RTR or an RMX 2.0 at about 350 quid, or the 2.5 at 400 and odd, there's actually a way better prospect to look secondhand to something that someone's got into the hobby and then decided that then it's not for them and they're moving on. So keep an eye on things like Facebook Marketplace and RC Drift UK Facebook group and Drift Spot Facebook group as well to see if anything comes up, because what a great little car. But anyway, we'll get into that and you can see what my thoughts are about the car and the chassis. So the GRK, if you don't know, was a chassis that was introduced probably about a year ago now and gained sort of rave reviews. A lot of people really like the car, really like the chassis. It was a pretty sort of bargainous price of about 150 quid for the chassis itself, plus all your components and parts. So this car is pretty much box fresh. As it stands, it's got a Hobbywing Quick Run 120 amp ESC. It's got an Onisiki 10.5T motor. It's got the MX6 receiver. And it's got the Onisiki servo that I also used to have one of those in my YD2. And the Shibata itself comes with a Power HD G1 gyro. It came with it as a deal when you bought the car originally, and this has still got its G1 gyro, which I think is okay. It seems to do the job all right. I think it could hold a line a little better, but we'll get to that when I show you it on the track and we talk about some of the things. All this has got all the original wheels that came with the kit. It's the full plastic original kit, and everything's been built up to a really nice standard, just been put together properly essentially. It did have one issue originally, which I know it chewed through a rear diff because he hadn't, Rob didn't shim the diff properly, or something along those lines. Anyway, new diff went in and it's running absolutely perfectly now and it's shimmed correctly. So that's one thing to watch out for when you build a Shibata GRK for sure. The ESC's at the back to give it a bit more rear balance, because once you've put the battery in the harness here, it's pretty much kind of a mid-motor chassis really, isn't it? With all the weight in the centre of the chassis, you think about the balancing point of that chassis. You've got your motor in the middle, you've got your battery in the middle opposing the weight of the motor, ESC to the rear to bring a bit of the weight over the rear wheels to give it a bit of extra grip. Seems to be a pretty good setup. There's loads of nice parts available for these, loads of nice carbon bits and all sorts of stuff. So you see some of them, they've got some nice purple alley bits and different details and such like. And that's quite cool that there are parts available to mod and tune these up. One of the things I didn't like quite so much about the kit that I know Kyle is keen to change is the fact that it came with just these normal pins for you to put your E-clips into, and essentially the body clips like that, they're a bit of a pain to get between your fingernails and so on. They're not the nicest, are they? Everyone tends to favour the magnet setup. So magnet setup for 10 quid off eBay and away you go. That could be a much nicer thing. I know that Rob didn't cut these down because he was tempted to change the shell. He bought himself a cheap shell to start himself going, and then never really got that far. So essentially this car was completely standard when Kyle bought it. The shell he got for it, I know this is the wrong way around now, but you can see the shell that he bought for it. This is just a cheap eBay shell. It's actually gone really, really well. They're one of these ones that you get for sort of 15 quid on eBay that are fully painted up, ready to go, with quite hilarious like spelling of different brands and such like on the sides. But you know what? It looks pretty cool. Looks like an R35, cheap as chips, good for a learner. And I think that's what we've got to try and keep in perspective on this video. Essentially, what we're looking at here is, are you better off buying a second-hand car, or are you better off buying an RTR? And it really does depend. I've heard different things from different people on different tracks. Some people will say, "I'll just go and buy an RTR, they work out the box." Some people will say, buy yourself a chassis. And I'm kind of in that bank, really. I would say, buy yourself a chassis where you can actually go somewhere with it. You can modify it, you can improve it along the way. Things like, compared to an RTR, this is a fully adjustable chassis. So you've got all your tie rods at the front there. You can adjust the camber, you can adjust the toe. You've got some spaces in this top arm here, so you can adjust the caster there. And, you know, compared to some of the other cars I've felt as standard out the box, there's not a lot of play in all these arms. It's quite a nice kit. The plastic's got quite a nice feel to it. It's quite nicely put together. So as a kit, I think these GRKs are quite nice. I think that a lot of people really loved them when they came out. It does seem like the kind of heyday of everyone ranting about them has slowed down. So, you know, you can get one second hand fairly cheap at the moment, which is quite a good thing for a new learner driver. And like I said, there's loads of parts that you can upgrade. So I guess the next thing to do is take you to the circuit and see what we think about this GRK on our painted concrete. I can let you into one little spoiler right now. Is one thing I think I'd probably change is the differential. I'd probably get myself a ball diff if one of those is available for it, hunt one out, just because I think it gets a little bit of snap overseer. But everything else I really like. Yeah, I like the slide rack. I like how smooth and progressive the slide rack is. If you have a look, you know, you can get some pretty good angle. Like I say, that's absolutely stock. The only thing we did put in here was a spacer between the knuckle and the wheel, just because the wheel was rubbing a bit on full lock, but it does get some pretty good lock as a standard chassis. Yeah, absolutely fine. I'd like to say it would be nicer if it had a little bit more travel to allow a little bit more movement. There's that slight, literally full height, full drop. There's not too much travel in that. And the same at the back. But I think, you know, changing the ball studs here, changing the length of the arm inside by just putting a pair of pliers on that and just twisting the ball end out just to add a little bit of length, you might be able to get a little bit more. And then I know that GRK do make carbon chassis for these, which probably have a little bit better clearance around these arms, because you can see the arms are just sat on the chassis, are both front to back. So to make those sit down that little bit lower, probably a little bit of adjustability in there. If you went to a carbon chassis, it might just make you gain that little bit of length of travel, which means you could really get it gripping up nice. But so far, I think it's a pretty well built chassis. And what I think we should do now is head over to the track, and I'll give you my thoughts on what is essentially a starter car with pretty sensible standard of equipment for somebody who's just getting into the hobby. And what an absolute bargain for the price that it was. So over to the track and we'll see what we think about the Shibata GRK. Okay, so I'm back down the unit. I did record this the other day at an actual drift night with the Shibata GRK. But it was just too loud with all the talking and you couldn't really see what was going on enough. So I've decided to film it again. So I'm back here down the club with the GRK. Interesting to make a comparison really against the other cars that we've seen so far on the channel. So I've obviously done an under the shell of a D5, under the shell of a YD2, and now we're looking at a Shibata GRK. What I did say at the very beginning was we can't really look this in the same light as things like the YD2 because it was heavily upgraded chassis with lots of better electronics and so on and things. This essentially is what I'd say is a starter car, and what I really need to do next is get something like an RMX 2.0 or 2.5 that's not had anything done to it out of the box and just give it a go in comparison. But I still believe this is a better purchase than an out of the box ready to go car, sort of thing you want to look for second hand on eBay. It does go really well. On the club night when it was down here, it was keeping up with all the traffic. It had a little bit of snap oversteer, and I think if you set up the suspension a little better from stock settings and tweaked a few bits and bobs, you'd probably get around that, but you'll see how it goes now. I think it's down to the fact that it's got a solid rear axle, so it makes it a little bit twitchy when it's on angle, and I also think the settings of the gyro could be a little bit better, but these are things that I'm sure we can work on and help Kyle with, our newest member, over time. So let's have a look at this car. You can see just then as I was going down that back straight how it sort of wavers under load. Spun it out then, couldn't quite handle it. You've got to be on it to retain that angle. It does make it a little harder to drive. It seems like when you're under angle, you can't keep on getting on more on the power. You really do need to be gentle when it's on lots of angle to retain that drift. But like I say, I think that's suspension settings. I think that is to do with the gyro as well. But on the whole, what a great little starter car. You've got to think that 300 quid, you can come down your drift club, be driving with other drivers with much better cars than you, and it would still get around the track, it would still help you learn, then you've got a great starting point to continue to upgrade and mess around with things, you know, put some better shocks on it, put a different diff in it. You know, I do think for people getting into the hobby as a fresh, it's probably a good thing to do to spend a little bit more, if you dare, on your electronics. You know, things like a Toro straight off the bat. And we really rate these motors from the Surpass rocket motors that they sell on AliExpress and things, which are pretty cheap. I'll put some links in the YouTube video to some of this cheap stuff that actually seems to have a quality of a much more expensive motor, because we think they go really well. I run a Surpass rocket in my D5 now, and it's, to me, feels almost as good as the gains that I got in my YD2 when I installed the D10, just because it's free rolling, has all those different details. But yeah, there we go. One Shibata GRK, you've got to see it drifting. She's quite happy, sliding around. Just a little bit twitchy on the limit. Gentle throttle control gets you around that. One of the things I did to help that was just reduce the low end of the throttle. So just setting up your exponential on your throttle, making the throttle a bit better at the lower end. One other thing that I think this could do with is probably a slightly better FDR as well. But all those things are to play for. A great little starter car. Thanks for watching again, and hopefully we're back with another variation of a chassis to show you another members under the shell. Thanks a lot.